Hello and welcome. Find a comfortable position. Let your body settle and allow your breath to find its own slow, natural rhythm. Tonight, we will let go of the day. We will leave behind thoughts of tasks and time. We are going to a very quiet, very simple place. A room of calm, without event or expectation. This is a story designed not to hold your attention, but to gently release it. There is no plot to follow, no characters to meet. There are only quiet details, described in a slow and even rhythm, to guide your mind into a state of deep rest. If your thoughts wander, it's okay. If you lose track of the words, it's okay. The only intention here is stillness. So, whenever you are ready, just let your eyes grow heavy and allow the words to wash over you like a soft, soundless wave. Let's begin. The room was quiet, but before that, please subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any updates and new stories daily. The room was quiet. It was a quiet room without much sound. The walls were a soft shade, perhaps a very light gray, or maybe a pale beige. It was hard to tell in this light, which was dim and without source. There was a window, but the curtains were drawn. They were heavy curtains of a thick fabric, and they hung straight down, their folds deep and regular, not moving at all in the still air. The air in the room was still. It was not cold, nor was it warm. It was simply neutral, a temperature that demanded no attention, that shifted neither toward heat nor toward chill. It was just there, like the walls, and the floor, which was covered by a carpet. The carpet was a medium tone, a color between brown and gray, a nondescript color that held no particular interest. Its fibers were short and even, a dense pile that showed no footprints, no paths worn by passage. It was as if no one had ever walked upon it, though the room was clearly furnished in a way. There was a chair by the window. It was an armchair, upholstered in a fabric that was smooth and slightly worn on the arms, but only slightly. The wear was so minimal as to be almost theoretical. A faint softening of the weave where an elbow might theoretically rest, if someone were to sit there. But no one was sitting there. The chair was empty. It was a comfortable-looking chair, but not extremely so. It did not promise profound comfort, only adequate support. Its cushions were full, but not overstuffed. They would give slightly underweight, then hold firm. The back of the chair rose to a modest height, enough to support a head if one were to lean back, but not so high as to envelop. It was just a chair. Next to the chair was a small table. It was a wooden table, made of a wood that was neither dark nor light. It was simply wood-colored. The grain was visible, long, slow lines that ran the length of the tabletop, interrupted occasionally by a small, tight knot. The knot was smooth to the touch, polished to the same dull sheen as the rest of the table. On the table sat a lamp. The lamp had a base made of ceramic, a simple rounded shape, glazed in a matte finish that reflected no highlights. The shade was made of parchment, or perhaps a material made to look like parchment. It was conical, wider at the bottom than at the top, and it diffused the light from the bulb within, a bulb of low wattage. The bulb was not on. The lamp was off. To the other side of the table there was a book. The book had a plain cover, a cloth binding in a dark blue, faded at the edges. The spine was slightly creased from having been opened, but not severely. The pages within were of a creamy, off-white paper, the kind that softens with age but does not yellow dramatically. The text was printed in a serif font, in neat, justified blocks. The paragraphs were of moderate length. The subject of the book was not important. It was likely something historical, or perhaps a minor work of natural philosophy from a previous century. It was not a thrilling narrative. It was a book of facts, gently stated, or of reflections, calmly paced. Outside the window, Beyond the heavy, motionless curtains, the world existed, but distantly. It was a cloudy day, or perhaps it was night. The light that seeped around the edges of the curtains was a diffuse, shadowless light, offering no clue to the time. There was no sound of traffic, or of birds, or of wind. There might have been a very faint, almost sub-audible hum, the hum of electricity in the wires within the walls, or the distant murmur of a city far away, filtered through layers of glass and brick and atmosphere, until it became a uniform, low drone, no more distinct than the sound of what. It was a white noise, a blanket of sound so consistent it became silent. In one corner of the room, where the pale wall met the medium-toned carpet, there was a slight shadow. It was not a dramatic shadow, not a pool of darkness, but merely a subtle deepening of tone, a suggestion that the two planes met and light did not gather as readily as elsewhere. The line where the wall met the floor was straight and true, a clean seam. The baseboard, painted the same color as the wall, was unadorned. There was no molding, no decorative trim. It was a simple, functional junction. The air continued to be still. A mote of dust, illuminated by some stray strand of light that had found its way into the room, hung suspended. It did not drift or dance. It simply hung, a tiny weightless particle, turning so slowly that its motion was imperceptible. One could watch it for minutes and see no change in its position. It was a speck of lint, perhaps, or a fragment of skin cell shed days ago and now caught in the stillness. It would remain there until some slight disturbance, a breath, a shift in the atmospheric pressure, would dislodge it and send it on a slow, lazy journey to the carpet, where it would come to rest among its countless fellows, indistinguishable. On the wall, opposite the window, there was a painting, or rather, a print in a frame. The frame was simple, a thin strip of brushed metal, silver but not shiny. The image within was a landscape, but a very calm one. It depicted a field under a vast, pale sky. The field was grassy, but the grass was not a vibrant green. It was the green of late summer, fading toward ochre, dotted with small, vague wildflowers of white and yellow. In the middle distance, a line of trees broke the horizon, their foliage a blurred mass of darker green. There were no animals in the field, no people. None. There was a suggestion of a path, a slight winding depression in the grass, but it did not lead anywhere specific. It meandered from the bottom corner of the image and faded into the grass before reaching a tree. The sky was mostly empty, filled with a hazy, milky light. A few faint brushstrokes near the top might have been very high, thin clouds, or they might have been nothing at all. The overall effect was one of immense space and profound quiet. It was a scene that held no event, no narrative, no point of focus. The eye could rest on it without being drawn to any particular detail. It was simply there, a rectangle of tranquility. Time, in this room, seemed to have a different quality. It did not tick by in measured seconds. It pooled. It settled, like the dust. The clock, if there was one, it did not tick. It was a digital clock, perhaps, on some unseen appliance, its numbers changing silently, without a click or a beep. Or perhaps there was no clock at all. The room existed outside of time, in a gentle, perpetual present. The past of the room was unimportant. Who had chosen the furniture when the book was last opened? The future of the room was similarly vague. It would likely remain just as it was, the air still, the chair empty, the light unchanged. This constancy was not oppressive. It was gentle. It asked for nothing. It expected nothing. Consider the weave of the carpet again. Each fiber, a tiny cylinder of twisted nylon or wool, standing upright amidst its neighbors. Together, they formed a dense forest, a texture so uniform that from a distance it appeared as a flat plane. But up close, one could see the individual strands, each casting a microscopic shadow on its neighbor. Pattern, if it could be called a pattern, was random. The fibers were not arranged in rows or grid. They were scattered, yet their collective effect was one of perfect evenness. If one were to walk on it, the sole of a sock would press thousands of these fibers down, bending them at a uniform angle, creating a temporary path that would slowly, over hours, rise back to its original position, erasing the passage. The carpet was a forgiving surface. It absorbed sound. It absorbed impact. It was a mediator between the hard floor beneath and the soft foot above. The fabric of the armchair bore closer inspection. If a twill weave, a diagonal ribbing that was subtle but present, running a hand over it, would produce a soft whispering sound, a faint friction. Color was a muted green, like moss in shadow, or the color of lichen on the north side of a tree. It was a color that had been chosen for its inability to offend, to demand notice. It blended with the pale walls and the medium carpet, creating a palette that was harmonious. Because it lacked contrast, there were no bright accents, no reds, no sharp whites. Everything was within a narrow range of tones, a spectrum of quiet. The silence was not absolute. If one listened, truly listened, past the initial impression of nothing, small sounds revealed themselves. There was the slow, rhythmic sigh of one's own breathing, the inhalation, a soft drawing in of the still air, a slight coolness at the back of the throat, the exhalation, warmer, releasing the air back into the room, a gentle stream that disturbed nothing. There was the pulse, a slow, deep throb felt internally, a reminder of life at its most basic, steady pace. Beyond that, perhaps a very faint gurgle of plumbing in a distant part of the building, a water droplet finding its way down a pipe, or the almost imperceptible expansion of the window frame as the temperature outside held constant, a tiny metallic creak that was more felt than heard. The book on the table had a bookmark in it. It was a simple bookmark, a strip of faded ribbon, perhaps originally a burgundy color, now softened to a dusky rose. It lay about a third of the way through the volume. The pages it rested between were slightly parted, as if someone had paused there, not in the middle of an exciting chapter, but perhaps at the end of a paragraph describing the migratory patterns of a certain bird, or the geological composition of a common type of sandstone. The prose would have been measured, factual, lulling. The sentences would have been complete, properly structured, without rhetorical flourish. They would have conveyed information in the calmest manner possible. Reading such a book would not excite the mind. It would settle it, giving it a gentle focus that would slowly blur at the edges as sleep approached. The reader would have left the bookmark, closed the cover, and perhaps never felt a pressing need to return, the act of reading itself having served its purpose of gentle occupation. In the space between the chair and the table, the carpet showed no depression. The pile was uniform. This suggested the chair had not been moved in some time. Its legs, made of the same nondescript wood as the table, rested squarely on the carpet, each foot covered by a small felt pad to prevent scratching. The pads were worn but intact. Everything in the room was in a state of gentle preservation. Nothing was new, but nothing was worn out. Everything had reached a plateau of existence where change was so slow as to be negligible. The lamp's cord trailed from its base, down the leg of the table, and across the floor to a socket in the wall. The cord was beige, blending with the carpet. It was not coiled or tangled. It lay in a single, relaxed curve, with one gentle loop near the plug. The plug itself was inserted firmly into the socket, which was a standard two-pronged socket, off-white in color, with no switch. The electricity was there, waiting, but unused. The potential for light existed, but was not activated. Let us return to the window. The curtains, upon closer examination, are not completely uniform. Their fabric, while heavy, has a texture. It is a chenille, a velvety cord woven into a soft, thick cloth. The cords run vertically in columns. The color is a deep, neutral taupe. At the very bottom of each curtain, the hem is weighted to ensure they hang straight and do not billow, but there is no breeze to cause billowing. They are as still as drapery in a painting. Where they meet in the middle of the window, they overlap by a few inches, creating a double layer of fabric that blocks the light more completely. There is no gap. No sliver of the outside world is visible. The window is a sealed rectangle, hidden behind a soft taupe barrier. The ceiling of the room is plain. It is painted the same pale color as the walls, perhaps with a flatter finish. There is a light fixture in the center, a simple domed ceiling mount of frosted glass. It is off. No shadows are cast by it. The ceiling is a blank plane, offering nothing for the eye to catch on. It recedes, a pale canopy over the quiet space. All of these elements together, the chair, the table, the lamp, the book, the carpet, the walls, the window, the painting, the ceiling, composed a scene of profound uneventfulness. It was a stage upon which no drama would or could take place. It was a sanctuary from incident. The mind entering the space, either in imagination or in reality, would find nothing to grip onto, nothing to chase, nothing to solve. It would be presented with a totality of calm so complete that agitation would have nothing to resonate against. It would be like a pebble dropped into a deep, still well of felt. It would make no sound, create no ripple, and simply come to rest at the bottom, unnoticed. The temperature remained constant. The stillness remained unbroken. The mote of dust might have shifted a micron to the left, but it was impossible to tell. The faint hum, if it was a hum, continued at exactly the same pitch and volume. It was not the hum of a refrigerator cycling on or off. It was a permanent ambient sound, the sound of the building itself existing, the sound of the world turning slowly on its axis, a deep planetary drone. One could imagine sitting in the armchair, not reading the book, not turning on the lamp, just sitting. The weight of the body would settle into the cushions, which would yield just enough. The arms would rest on the chair's arms, hands palms down on the smooth, worn fabric. The head would lean back against the support. The eyes would close, or they would remain open, gazing at nothing in particular. Perhaps the painting of the field, but not focusing on it, letting the colors and shapes blur into a soft smudge of green and beige and pale blue. The breathing would slow to match the rhythm of the room, deep and even. The thoughts, which might have been scurrying like small, anxious animals, would begin to still. They would lose their urgency. A thought about a task left undone would arise, but it would seem distant, belonging to another world outside the heavy curtains, a world that held no claim here. Thought would fade, replaced by nothing, by a gentle blankness. Another thought, a memory perhaps, would surface, but without its emotional charge. It would be like watching a silent film with a projector out of focus, shapes moving without meaning, without story, and that too would dissolve back into the quiet. The sense of time would dissolve next. Was it afternoon? No. Was it midnight? It did not matter. In this room, time was not a commodity to be spent or saved. It was just a medium, like the still air in which one rested. The minutes did not pass. They accumulated, like soft snow, layering soundlessly upon one another, building a drift of timelessness. And an hour could pass, or 5 minutes, the experience would be the same. A sustained, continuous presence. The body in the chair would grow heavier, more relaxed. The muscles of the face, often held with unconscious tension, would soften. The jaw would unclench. The shoulders, which had been held slightly up toward the ears, would drop, releasing their weight fully into the chair. The feet, resting on the carpet, would feel the soft, dense pile through socks. There would be no need to move them. Any position became comfortable, because the room demanded no activity, no readiness. It was a place of pure being, not doing. Outside, in the world beyond the curtain, perhaps a car passed, very far away. Its sound was a whisper of friction on asphalt, a wave that rose and fell, lasting no more than 3 seconds. And when it was gone, the silence it left behind was deeper, more complete, as if the sound had proven the silence's existence. In the painting, the field remained empty. The grass did not sway. The clouds did not drift. It was a captured moment of endless calm, a window into a world even quieter than this room. One could imagine walking into that field. The grass would be dry, brushing softly against ankles. The air would be still there too. The sky would be vast and empty. There would be no destination. One would simply walk, slowly without purpose, until walking itself became unnecessary, and one would lie down in the grass, looking up at the pale sky, and the boundary between self and field. And the boundary between self and field and sky would gently dissolve. Back in the room, that same dissolution was possible. Why is the boundaries of the self, the skin, the sense of being a separate entity inside a head could soften. The still air was breathed in and became part of the lungs. The quiet entered through the ears and settled the mind. The neutral colors entered through the eyes and soothed the sight. One became less a person in a room, and more a part of the room's atmosphere, a slightly warmer, breathing part of its gentle ecosystem. There held the body. The carpet held the chair. The floor held the carpet. The building held the room. The earth held the building. It was a chain of support, each element resting effortlessly on the one below, all the way down to the planet's core, which turned slowly, steadily, without hurry. This solid, reliable support required no gratitude, no acknowledgement. It simply was. One could surrender all weight to it, knowing it would not yield. The light, what little there was, did not change. It did not brighten or dim. It was a constant diffused glow, without direction, that eliminated shadows and with them, depth. The room felt slightly flat, two-dimensional, like the painting itself. This was not disorienting. It was simplifying. A world without shadows is a world without hidden corners, without secrets, without things lurking. Everything is exposed, and because everything is benign, this exposure is comforting. There is nothing to fear in this flat, even light. The air, though still, was not stale. It was clean, scentless. It carried no perfume, no cooking smells, no hint of dust or mildew. It was like high-altitude air, thin and neutral. Each breath was effortless. The lungs filled and emptied with a smooth automatic rhythm that soon fell out of conscious notice. Breathing happened, like the hum, like the stillness, a background process that sustained life without demanding attention. And so, in this room, with its pale walls and medium carpet, its empty chair and quiet table, its dormant lamp and forgotten book, its heavy curtains and placid painting, there was nothing to do but exist. And existing in such a place was not a task. It was a rest. It was a long, slow exhalation that never needed to end. The mind could let go of its endless cataloging, its planning, its worrying, its remembering. It could release its grip on the stream of thoughts and let them flow by, unattended, like leaves on a very slow, very wide river, until the leaves themselves became fewer and farther between, and the river's surface became smooth and the body was safe. The mind was quiet. The world was held at bay by heavy curtains and profound uneventfulness. This was not boredom in the anxious sense. It was a deep, resonant peace. The peace of a pond so still, it reflects the clouds perfectly. The peace of a forest floor, where no creature stirs. The peace of a library after closing time, when the last patron has left and the books set. One could stay here for a long time. One could, in fact, drift. The line between wakefulness and sleep in such an environment became porous, indistinct. Awareness gently diffused like a drop of ink in a vast bowl of still water, spreading until it was everywhere and nowhere, coloring the whole transparent medium with a gentle, uniform tint of drowsiness. The edges of things, the line between the wall and the ceiling, the curve of the lamp base, the corner of the book, began to lose their sharpness. They softened, blurred. The room itself seemed to breathe, very slowly, in and out, its dimensions expanding and contracting with the rhythm of one's own heartbeat. Now slow and heavy, the chair was no longer just holding the body. It seemed to embrace it, its cushions molding gently, offering support exactly where it was needed. The weight of the limbs was a pleasant weight, a sinking into comfort, into support. The sounds, the few that were there, melted together into a single soft tone. A drone that was not a noise, but an auditory blanket. Thoughts, if they came, were like the clouds in the painting, faint, formless, and moving with infinite slowness across the vast sky of the mind. They held no meaning. They were just wisps, passing through without leaving a trace. The carpet is soft. That was not a thought with consequence. It was an observation that melted as soon as it formed. The air still. Another observation that dissolved into the feeling it described. This was the essence of the room. It was a place where everything dissolved into a gentle, unified whole. Perception dissolved into sensation. Sensation dissolved into peace. Peace dissolved into sleep. And sleep, here, was not a sudden plunge into darkness, but a slow, seamless merging with the quiet, a gradual deepening of the already profound stillness, until the stillness was inside and outside, and there was no... The story does not end, because an ending would be an event. It simply continues, like the field in the painting, like the still air, like the deep planetary hum, on and on, in an unbroken, unchanging, beautifully boring continuum of rest. The chair remains, the book remains, the curtain does not stir, the light does not change, the breath comes slow and goes slow, and all is quiet, all is still, all is profoundly, deeply, uninterruptedly calm. The quiet continues, but the stillness holds, the peace remains. Well, there is nothing more to say. There is nothing more to hear. There is only the soft, endless, gentle, unremarkable, soothing, monotonous, boring, perfect, sleep-inducing quiet. And it goes on, and on, and on. Well, they say some of those. But to continue, one must look closer. Let us examine the wall. The wall is painted with a matte emulsion. The color, as noted, is a pale, warm gray, the color of a dove's breast, or of ashes from a very old fire, long cooled. The matte finish is important. It does not reflect light. It absorbs it, softly diffusing it across its surface. This lack of reflection is what eliminates shine, and shine is a kind of visual noise. The wall is silent to the eyes. If one were to approach the wall, to stand within a few inches of it, the texture of the painted plaster would become apparent. It is not perfectly smooth. Many times, there is a subtle, almost granular texture, the legacy of the roller that applied the paint. Tiny peaks and troughs, microscopic landscapes that catch the light in no particular pattern. This texture is so fine that from the chair it is invisible. It is only known in theory, or upon very close inspection. The paint itself is a blend of titanium dioxide for opacity and minute amounts of pigment for the gray tone. It is a scientifically formulated substance designed to cover a surface evenly and without fault. It has succeeded. The wall is a uniform plane of quiet color. It meets the ceiling in a crisp line. The ceiling white is a fraction cooler, perhaps, but the difference is negligible. The line where they meet is straight, painted with care by a steady hand using painter's tape. There is no bleeding of one color into the other. The junction is a clean, geometric fact. The corner where two walls meet is also a perfect right angle. The plasterboard has been taped and jointed with skill, sanded to a seamless curve. There is no crack. There is no flaw. The corner is simply the place where one pale plane turns at 90 degrees to become another. Let us consider the book more thoroughly. The dark blue cloth of the cover is faded most at the spine, where the oils from fingers have transferred over time, interacting with the dye. The title is stamped on the spine in gilt lettering, but the gilt has worn away in places, leaving only faint, ghostly impressions of the letters. One can make out perhaps a TT, N, L, N, E. The rest is ambiguous. It could be the principles of mineralogy. It could be the history of cartography. It does not matter. What? Opening the book to the page marked by the ribbon reveals text. The page number is 147. The left-hand page is the end of a chapter. The final paragraph reads, "Thus, the sedimentation process, occurring over millennia, results in the distinct striations observable in shale deposits. The pace of this accumulation is variable, subject to climatic." The sentences are dry, factual, and slow. They speak of processes that take longer than a human lifetime to show even the slightest change. The right-hand page begins a new chapter. Its title is simply "On Still Waters." The first sentence is, "A body of water without current or tide achieves a state of clarity unattainable in more turbulent environment." This is the kind of prose that fills the book. Observations of stillness, of slowness, of processes so gradual they seem like stasis. It is the perfect book for this room. To read it would be to engage in a meta-experience of boredom, a description of slowness while one sits in slowness. The paper is of a high cotton content. It feels substantial between the fingers, not flimsy. It makes a soft, muffled rustle when turned, not a sharp crackle. The ink is slightly raised on the surface, a legacy of letterpress printing. Running a fingertip over a line of type, one could feel the gentle impression of each letter, a tiny topography of information. But the book is closed. It rests. The ribbon hangs out, a silent marker of a pause that may be permanent. The lamp's ceramic base is cool to the touch. It was turned on hours ago, perhaps, for a short period of reading, and has since been switched off, allowing the ceramic to return to the ambient temperature of the room. The switch is a small rotary switch on the socket. It is currently in the off position. The cord, where it enters the base, is reinforced with a plastic sheath, a small, flexible coil that prevents the wire from bending too sharply. This is a detail of safety and longevity, a thought for the future in an object that sees little use. The plug at the wall is a standard design. The two parallel metal prongs are made of brass, plated with nickel to prevent corrosion. They conduct nothing now. They are dormant. Well, behind the wall plate, wires coated in colored plastic, brown for live, blue for neutral, run back through the wall cavity, connecting to a circuit breaker in a distribution board somewhere in the building. That entire system is dormant too. A sleeping network of potential energy. Let us return to the dust mote. It is still hanging in the air. Its composition is complex. Under a microscope, it might appear as a tangled cluster of fibers, skin cells, and perhaps a grain of pollen from a plant that no longer blooms. It is a relic of past activity, now frozen in the present stillness. The forces acting upon it are in perfect, precarious balance. The gentle warmth of the air creates a minor convection current that holds it aloft, counteracting the relentless, constant pull of gravity. Gravity is patient. It does not tug. It simply persists. Eventually, the balance will tip. The mote will begin a descent. It will not fall straight down. It will drift, listing slightly, caught in the invisible, sluggish eddies of air, displaced by the room's own existence. Its journey to the carpet might take an hour. It might take 3. It will be a journey of incredible slowness, a pilgrimage to a soft, fibrous plane. When it finally lands, it will be on the arm of the chair, perhaps, or on the tabletop next to the book. It will come to rest without a sound. Its journey will be complete. It will have moved, but in the context of the room, that movement will have been meaningless. A microscopic event in a microcosm of calm. The painting's frame, the brushed metal, has a direction to its brushing. The fine lines run horizontally. They catch the light in one direction and appear darker in the other. From the chair, this effect is subtle. The frame is merely a border, a definition for the field within. The field itself, the painted field, invites a deeper journey. Let us go there now, in the mind. Not with a sudden leap, but with a slow transition. Well, the room blurs, its edges softening, its colors melting into the colors of the painting. The pale wall becomes the pale sky. The green of the chair becomes the faded green of the grass. And one is there. Oh, the air in the field is still, but it is a different kind of still. It is open-aired stillness. It carries a faint, dry scent of hay and warm earth. The grass underfoot is yielding. Each step is slow. The lifting of the foot, the brief moment of suspension, the placement of the foot ahead, the transfer of weight. The process is broken down into its constituent parts, each part given full attention. There is no hurry. The path is not followed, for the path goes nowhere. One simply walks in a wide, aimless arc. The trees on the horizon do not get closer. They are a backdrop, a smudge of darker tone. The sky is immense, a dome of whitish blue, that has no sun, no discernible source of light. It is simply bright evenly from horizon to horizon. The clouds, those faint brushstrokes, are stationary. They are not cumulus clouds, full and dynamic. They are cirrus, high and wispy, frozen in the upper atmosphere. A single bird, A speck might be imagined far, far up, but it does not flap its wing. It hangs, a distant mark against the vastness, and then the imagination lets it go, and it is gone. The walk continues. The sound of one's own footsteps is muffled by the grass. Swish, bunte, a pause. Wish, wound, a pause. The rhythm matches the breath. Indunti, out. Aleti, step, ponte, step, pont only. The mind empties further. Well, the concerns of a life, the digital chatter, the mental lists, they have no purchase here. This field has never heard of emails or appointments. Appointment. It knows only grass and sky and the patient turn of the planet. One could walk here until the legs grow tired, and then one would simply stop and lie down. The ground would be firm but soft, the dried earth giving slightly under the weight of the body. The grass stems would bend, forming a natural mattress. Looking up, the sky would fill the entire field of vision. The eyes would lose their focus. The sky would become a blanket of soft light, and there, in the field, under the vast empty sky, sleep would come as naturally as dusk. It would not be an escape, but emerging, the body becoming part of the earth, the breath becoming part of the air, the quiet mind becoming part of the vast, silent dome above. Back in the room, this feeling translates. The chair is the grassy ground, the ceiling is the sky, the stillness is the same. The breath continues, slow and even. In the field, one counted steps. In the room, one can count breaths, not with numbers, but with a gentle internal nod to each cycle. The breath in, a filling. The pause at the top, a moment of suspension. The breath out, a slow, controlled release. The pause at the bottom, a moment of emptiness. And again, the breath in, the pause, the breath out, the pause. The rhythm is a metronome for relaxation. Each cycle a wave that washes a little more tension away, a little more thought away. The breath in, cool. The breath out, warm. The breath in, quiet. The breath out, quieter. The body is now deeply relaxed. The hands are heavy on the arms of the chair. The fingers are slightly curled, utterly passive. The eyelids, if they are still open, see only a blur. The painting is a greenish smudge. The lamp is a pale shape. There is no need to focus. Focusing is an effort. Here, there is no effort. There is only allowance. Allowing the chair to hold the weight, allowing the air to fill the lungs, allowing the quiet to fill the mind. It is a passive state, a state of receiving calm rather than seeking it. A sound from the outside world attempts to intrude. It is the sound of a distant siren many blocks away. It is a thin, wailing sound, rising and falling. But in this room, behind these curtains, the sound is filtered. It is muffled. It becomes abstract. It is not a siren, an alert, a sign of emergency. It is merely a sound wave, a fluctuation in air pressure. It rises in pitch, then falls. It rises again, then falls again. It is a pattern without meaning. It fades, and as it fades, it is absorbed into the hum, into the silence, leaving no echo, no memory. The room digests the sound and returns to stillness. But the temperature remains constant. A thermostat in another part of the building clicks on, triggering a furnace or a pump to maintain the ambient temperature. The is inaudible here. Only the result is felt. A consistency of climate that requires no adjustment, no putting on a sweater or kicking off a blanket. The body is in thermal equilibrium with its environment. This is another form of peace. The body is not fighting heat or cold. It is simply existing in a neutral zone. The sense of time is now completely gone. The present moment has stretched into a continuum. One could be sitting for 10 minutes or 2 hours. The experience is identical. This is the liberation of boredom achieved. When nothing happens, and nothing is expected to happen, time loses its forward arrow. It becomes a space to inhabit, not a river to swim against. The mind, freed from tracking progress, from anticipating the next event, settles into a pleasant, timeless torpor. This is the anteroom to sleep. Let the gaze, if the eyes are open, fall upon the carpet, not looking at it, but letting it be in the field of vision. The medium tone, the uniform texture, is a visual mantra. It holds no information to process. It is like a soft, brownish-gray noise for the eye. The brain, seeking pattern, finds none, and gives up the search. The visual cortex relaxes. The images from the eyes become less sharp, less defined. The room blurs at the edges. The center of vision may soften too. It is like a lens losing its focus, not because of weakness, but because of a deliberate, gentle letting go. The breath continues. Wow, irritant, on the curiosity, and out, and in, and out. Pattern is steady, like the gentle lap of water against a very still shore, at very long intervals. Each breath is a wave of relaxation, washing in, washing out, each time leaving the mental shore smoother, flatter, more calm. The weight of the body is now a pleasant, warm heaviness. It is a sensation of being grounded, of being utterly supported. The chair holds everything. There is no need for the muscles to engage, even minutely. They can let go entirely. Oh, they can become like the air, still and neutral. The jaw is slack. The tongue rests in the bottom of the mouth. The shoulders have melted into the back of the chair. The feet are like weights, sinking into the soft carpet. This is the physical expression of mental surrender. And now, the thoughts have finally stilled. They are not gone, but they are like distant stars on a very dark night, present, but faint, and having no bearing on the immediate, dark sea of calm. A thought twinkles. I am sleepy. It is not an instruction, just an observation. It fades. Another. This is quiet. It too fades. The space between thoughts grows longer. The dark sea becomes smoother. The mind is like the surface of the pond in the book, achieving a clarity unattainable in more turbulent environments. It reflects nothing but the calm, shadowless sky of the room. The transition now is subtle. The awareness of the room, the chair, the light, the painting, begins to dim. It does not vanish, but it becomes distant, as if one is receding from it, or it is receding from oneself. The sensations blend together. The feeling of the fabric, the sight of the blur, the sound of the breath, the constant temperature, they all merge into a single, unified sensation of comfort and safety. This unified sensation is the final stepping stone. Sleep does not arrive with a fanfare. It encroaches. Oh, it is a gentle tide coming in, and the conscious mind is the sand being slowly, peacefully covered. The edges go first. The peripheral awareness of the body fades. Then the sense of the room as a distinct place softens. What remains is the rhythm of the breath, now automatic, now a distant echo of a process that continues on its own. And then, even that rhythm becomes part of the background, part of the hum, part of the stillness. The room is quiet. The chair holds a sleeping form. The dust mote continues its imperceptible drift. The painting's field is empty. The book is closed. The lamp is off. The curtains are still. All is as it was, and all is as it will be. There is only the deep, restful, uninterrupted quiet, a quiet that is not empty, but full of peace. A stillness that is not dead, but deeply, profoundly alive with rest. It holds, it continues, it is, and so we rest. Woe, in the quiet room, in the still field, in the gentle hum, in the slow breath. There is nowhere to go, nothing to do, no one to be, just rest. Deeper now, tongue, and deeper, letting go, sinking down. One is into the soft, into the quiet, into the dark, into the peace. Deeper, and deeper, and deeper still. The words fade now, leaving only the feeling of weight, the feeling of stillness, the feeling of safety, the feeling of quiet. Let the feeling be your guide, down, up, into sleep, down, into rest, down, to the quiet continues. The stillness holds. It holds the room, and the room holds the stillness. In a perfect, self-sustaining loop, the air remains motionless, a transparent medium with no desire to move. The molecules of nitrogen and oxygen and argon hang in their distribution, bouncing against one another with a gentle, constant energy that registers as temperature, but no collective will to form a breeze. There is no eddy, no draft, no current. The air in the corner by the ceiling is the same temperature, the same density, the same composition as the air by the floor, by the chair, by the table. It is a uniform bath of atmosphere, still and complete. And within this stillness, the perception of the room deepens. It is not just seen or felt, it is known in its totality. The quiet is not merely an absence of sound, but a presence. It has a texture, and that texture is smooth. It is a smoothness that fills the ears, a soft pressure like lying on a perfectly level warm surface. This sonic smoothness muffles the internal mechanisms of the body. The heartbeat, that steady, distant drum, becomes part of the smoothness. The rush of blood in the ears becomes a soft hiss, a white noise that blends into the greater white noise of silence. Even the electrical crackle of the nervous system, the tiny, unfelt signals that race through the brain, seem to slow their frantic chatter, their impulses becoming longer, slower waves aligning with the slow breath. The light continues its diffuse existence. It comes from nowhere and everywhere. It has no angle and therefore casts no shadow. Without shadow, depth perception softens. The room becomes a collection of softly defined planes. The wall is a pale sheet. The carpet is a textured sheet. The tabletop is a wooden plane. The chair is a green shape. This visual simplification is a great relief to the mind. The brain's visual cortex, so often tasked with interpreting edges, contrasts, movements, threats, and details, is given permission to stand down. There are no threats here. There are no details that demand analysis. There is only soft shape and softer color. The eyes, if they are open, can relax their focus. The lens inside each eye does not need to contract or expand to sharpen an image. It can float at its most neutral setting. The muscles around the eyes, the tiny muscles that constantly make micro-adjustments, can release their tension. This release is a physical sigh that travels inward, a small but significant letting go that echoes through the face, down the neck, into the shoulders. The chair, that dependable green chair, continues its silent work of support. Its springs, old but resilient, are compressed just so under the weight they bear. They do not squeak. They hold their position. A complex network of tempered steel coiled in perfect submission to physics. The cushion's foam, a high-density polyurethane, has memorized the shape it is asked to hold. It has slowly, over time, conformed to a gentle depression, a shallow bowl that cradles the hips and thighs. It is not a custom shape, but it is a familiar one. It offers a gentle embrace, a passive containment. The fabric of the upholstery, that muted green twill, stretches imperceptibly over this form. Each thread in the weave bears a minuscule portion of the load. They are strong threads, woven tightly, and they do not strain. They simply exist as a membrane between the foam within and the air without. Consider the table leg. It is a turned leg, simple in design. It widens slightly at the foot where it meets the felt pad and swells gently at the knee before tapering toward the table's apron. The turning lathe that shaped it moved with a steady mechanical rhythm, its chisel peeling away a continuous ribbon of pale wood years ago, in a workshop now silent. That ribbon is gone, dispersed into sawdust, but the leg remains, its shape a fossil of that former motion. Now absolutely still, the grain of the wood wraps around the leg in long flowing lines, like a topographic map of a very slow, very gentle hill. The varnish that seals it is thin and hard, a glassy skin that has cured to a state of permanent inertness. It does not off-gas. It does not yellow further. It is done. It is a finished thing. On the table, the lamp remains off. The switch is in the off position. The internal wiring of the lamp, the copper strands sheathed in rubber, are dormant. Electrons are not flowing. The circuit is open, an incomplete path. The potential for light is a thought trapped in metal and glass. The bulb's filament, that delicate tungsten coil, is cold. It is a spring under no tension. If one were to shake the lamp gently, the filament would sway, a tiny silent pendulum, but no one shakes the lamp. It is as still as everything else. The lampshade, the parchment cone, gathers no light to diffuse. It simply sits, a geometric form, a funnel for illumination that is not required. Its purpose is latent. It waits without anticipation. The book, too, waits. The paragraph that begins on still waters continues on page 148. It discusses the phenomenon of a water surface becoming so calm it acts as a perfect mirror, reflecting the sky so completely that the boundary between air and water vanishes, creating the illusion of infinite depth. The author notes that this state is fragile, susceptible to the slightest disturbance, a drop pebble, a breath of wind. The prose is careful, academic. It does not marvel at the beauty. It analyzes the conditions required for the illusion. This is the tone of the entire book. It is a tone that admires stillness through clinical detachment, which in its own way is a form of deep reverence. The book is a monument to quiet observation. It does not belong in a bustling cafe. It belongs here, on this table, in this room, where its subject matter is not just described, but embodied. Outside, the world persists in its distant way. The hum, that low foundational drone, may have its source in a transformer on a utility pole 3 streets away. It is converting high voltage to low voltage for the homes and apartments. It does this continuously, 24 hours a day, a cycle of electromagnetic induction that creates a vibration, a frequency that travels through the ground and the air. By the time it reaches this room, through layers of brick and plaster and drywall, it has been stripped of all its mechanical specificity. It is no longer the hum of a transformer. It is simply the hum, the auditory signature of the building's aliveness. It is a sound so constant, it is perceived only in its absence, and its absence never comes. So it becomes the bedrock of the silence. A minute passes, or perhaps 5. Time is not measured. It is absorbed. The body in the chair sinks another micron into the cushion. As the foam makes its final, almost imperceptible adjustment, a muscle in the lower back, which had been holding a faint, unconscious tightness related to the posture of the day, finally receives the signal from the quieted brain that it too can let go. It does so. The muscle fibers lengthen. A small knot of tension dissolves, its energy dispersing as a faint warmth that is immediately lost in the neutral temperature of the room. This is one of 100 such tiny releases happening throughout the body. Each release is a vote for sleep, a physical affirmation of the safety of this place. The nervous system shifts its state, moving from a gentle waking rest into the first preparatory stages of sleep. The brainwave patterns begin to slow. The alpha waves, associated with relaxed wakefulness, begin to be interspersed with the slower theta waves. The waves of drowsiness, of daydreaming, of the threshold. The field in the painting remains. It is a thought that can be visited without moving. All the mind can rest there. It is not a distraction from the room. It is an extension of it. The field is the room's spiritual counterpart. The room is contained stillness. The field is expansive stillness. Both are valid. Both lead to the same peace. In the mind's eye, one can be in both places at once. The body feels the chair, the solid support, the woven fabric. The mind sees the vast sky, the endless grass. This duality is not confusing. It is enriching. It gives the consciousness a gentle anchor and a wide sky to float in. The anchor is a sensation of weight, of being held. The sky is the sensation of release, of limitlessness. Between them, the self finds perfect balance, an equilibrium that requires no effort to maintain. The breath continues its automatic rhythm. It has now become so slow, so deep, that it seems to originate from the center of the body, from a place below the lungs. The diaphragm moves with a lazy, fluid motion. The in-breath feels like the room itself is being drawn in. The cool, quiet air filling not just the chest, but the awareness. The out-breath feels like emerging, the warm air leaving the body and rejoining the room's atmosphere, carrying away the last remnants of the day's mental residue. Each cycle is a cleansing, a clearing. The oxygen enters the bloodstream, is carried to the brain, and fuels the slow, rhythmic electrical dance that is preparing for sleep. The carbon dioxide leaves, a waste product of being alive, effortlessly expelled. Now, the boundaries that seemed so firm, the wall, the curtain, the skin, begin to feel less like barriers and more like gentle gradient. The warmth of the body radiates a fraction of a degree into the air immediately around it, creating a soft, personal microclimate that blends seamlessly with the room climate. The sight blurs so that the line where the pale wall meets the pale ceiling is no longer a line, but a seamless fade from one tone to another. The sound of the breath is no longer inside the head. It is in the space around the head, part of the room's acoustic texture. This is the dissolution. The ego's fortress. The sense of being a separate observer in the room begins to lower its drawbridge. There is no enemy to keep out, only peace to welcome in. So the walls of the self become permeable. The quiet outside seeps in. The calm inside seeps out. They meet and become indistinguishable. A deep, quiet sigh, unrelated to the cycle of breathing, may escape the lips. It is not a sigh of sadness or frustration. It is a sigh of final surrender, a physiological acknowledgement that the work of the day is done. The vigilance can cease. The guard can stand down. It is the sound of the body agreeing with the mind, and the mind agreeing with the room, that all is safe, all is still, all is well. The darkness behind the eyelids, if the eyes are closed, is not a black darkness. It is a velvety gray, shot through with faint shifting patterns of softer gray, phosphenes, the light show of the optic nerve at rest. These patterns have no form. They are like the slow drift of oil on water, but slower. They are a visual lullaby, a non-image to occupy the mind's eye as it disengages from external stimulus. Watching them is not looking. It is a form of listening with the eye. They pulse gently in time with the heartbeat, a silent internal symphony of rest. The weight is now total. The body is a mass of pleasant density, fully entrusted to the chair, which is fully entrusted to the floor, which is fully entrusted to the earth. This chain of trust is unbreakable, is the trust of gravity, of structure, of solid matter. There is no fear of falling. There is only the certainty of being held. This certainty is the final key. It unlocks the deep subconscious, allowing the primitive parts of the brain that manage vigilance to power down. The amygdala, the watchtower, sees a landscape of perfect quiet. It signals the all clear. The reticular activating system, the gatekeeper of consciousness, begins to narrow its filter. The external world, the room, the hum, the light, fades from primary awareness. The internal world, the breath, the heartbeat, the warming darkness, becomes the whole world. And in that inner world, the thoughts have finally ceased their flickering. The mental screen is not blank with effort, but blank with completion. It is a clean, smooth sheet, a gentle, drowsy emptiness. This is not the emptiness of lack, but the emptiness of fullness digested, of a day fully released, of a mind fully at rest. It is a fertile emptiness, ready to receive the unstructured narratives of dreams. But not yet. First, there is the blissful, thought-free void, the space between waking and dreaming, the liminal chapel of sleep. The room, the faithful room, has done its work. It provided the container, the atmosphere, the permission. Now, it recedes. Its details, the shade of gray, the pattern of the twill, the title of the book, no longer matter. They return to being what they always were, anonymous components of a sanctuary. They blur into a general impression of safety, a memory of calm, that the sinking mind carries with it like a soft blanket into the depths. The breath shallows. The intervals between breaths lengthen. Hold. The body is entering the first stage of non-REM sleep. The muscles are fully relaxed. The eyes are still. The amygdala are still. The brain waves are slowing, synchronizing into the long, rolling waves of theta, heading toward the deep, slow delta waves of restorative sleep. The story does not follow you here. It stops at the threshold. Its last duty is to become as quiet as the room it describes, to become indistinguishable from the silence it has cultivated. The words become softer, slower, farther apart. Quiet, still, schwingen, safe, nee, het, und, die, rest. Sleep, pausing, and within that sleep, there was no story. There was no dream of action or adventure. If there was a dream, it was a dream of the room itself, a dream of the chair, perceived from the inside, the feeling of being the foam cushion, holding a pleasant weight, a dream of being the dust mote, in a state of endless, peaceful suspension, a dream of being the pale wall, experiencing time only as a faint, even pressure from the atmosphere, a pressure that asked for nothing and caused no strain. The quiet persisted. It persisted beyond the threshold of hearing into the realm of feeling. It was a texture in which the sleeping form was wrapped, a texture of pure neutrality, not soft, not hard, but simply present. Like the concept of surface, the silence was not an absence now. It was a substance. It had a density. That density was the density of rest itself, a psychological and physical medium that slowed all processes, that cushioned all thought. Hours might have passed. Well, the diffuse light around the curtains might have faded a degree, suggesting a dusk, or it might have brightened a fraction, suggesting a dawn. But within the room, the change was so slight, so gradual, as to be a geological event. The shift in luminance was measured in lux per hour, a crawl towards shadow, or towards gray light that was irrelevant to the deep, slow rhythms of sleep inside the room. The room acted as a buffer, a dampener against the cycles of the world. It was a capsule of perpetual twilight, the perfect ambience for uninterrupted rest. The furniture continued its silent vigil. The chair's springs settled by a fraction of a millimeter more, having fully accepted their burden. The table's wood, responsive to the faintest change in humidity, perhaps contracted by a micron, a movement so small it would register only to an instrument, not to a sense. The book's pages, hygroscopic as all paper is, may have curled infinitesimally at the very corners, responding to the still air. These were not events. They were the room breathing at a pace 1,000 times slower than human breath, the exhalation and halation of materials adjusting to equilibrium. Consider the electrical outlet again. Within the walls, behind the faceplate, the copper wires ran through their conduit. They were dead wires. No current flowed, but in the wider network of the building, currents flowed elsewhere. In other rooms, clocks displayed digits. Refrigerators hummed on their cycles. Chargers fed tiny trickles of power to dormant devices. These flows created a complex humming network of electromagnetic fields, faint ghosts of energy pulsing through the structure. The room was not entirely separate from this. The faint, constant drone that underpinned the silence was the auditory footprint of this distant, civilized activity. It was the sound of a world functioning smoothly enough to be ignored. It was the sound of infrastructure doing its job, which was to be invisible, reliable, and boring. This sonic bedrock was a reassurance. It meant the systems were working. Nothing required attention. Everything was on autopilot. That was the gift of the modern world. A boring, dependable background against which profound rest could occur. The sleeping breath had found its deepest pattern now. The breaths were long, slow draws, followed by longer pauses, and then soft, sighing releases. The pattern was one of profound metabolic rest. The body was in repair mode. Cells were dividing, tissues were rebuilding. Memories from the day were being sorted and filed in the hippocampus, not as vivid stories, but as faint impressions to be largely discarded. The brain was washing itself in cerebrospinal fluid, a nightly cleansing tide. All of this happened in the dark, silent factory of the body, governed by the ancient, automatic rhythms of the parasympathetic nervous system. The room was the external counterpart to this internal state. It was a parasympathetic environment. Everything in it said, "You are safe. You can rest. No demands will be made here. Let the mind wander back to the field and the painting." But in this drowsy state, the field changes. It is no longer a painting. It becomes a memory of a place that never existed, a primal memory of openness. The grass is not individual blades, but a soft, continuous fur. The sky is not a separate entity, but a dome of gentle light that merges with the air. There is no horizon line, only a gradual softening of green, into blue, into white. In this field, one does not walk. One is simply present, as a point of awareness. The concept of a body is vague. There is only the sensation of openness, of being uncontained, yet perfectly secure. This is the mental landscape that the room cultivates. It is anti-claustrophobic in its stillness. The walls do not press in. They define a safe space that then expands inward, into the mind, becoming as vast as any field. A sound, the first in what feels like an age, but is perhaps only 20 minutes. It is the sound of the building's central heating system engaging, a soft metallic clunk from deep within the walls or floors. It is not a sharp sound. It is a dull, thick sound, like a large stone settling in soft earth. It is followed by the faintest rush of water or air through pipes, a hollow, distant sigh, then a low, resonant hum, deeper than the electrical drone, a bass note of machinery. This is the sound of the building maintaining its temperature, fulfilling its promise of neutrality. It is not an interruption. It is a reinforcement. It is the sound of the room's promise being kept, the promise of constant, unremarkable comfort. The sound rises to a steady pitch and holds there a new, deeper layer in the auditory blanket. Then, after a time, it cycles off. The clunk happens again, slightly softer. The rushing sigh fades, the deep hum vanishes, and the silence that returns is not the same silence. It is a silence that has been proven. It has been tested by sound and has reasserted itself, stronger and deeper for the contra. The weight of the body is now absolute. It is as if the force of gravity has increased by a tiny, comfortable percentage, gently pinning the form to the chair, not as a restriction, but as an affirmation of its right to be exactly where it is, moving not at all. This gravitational embrace is the final permission slip for the mind to fully relinquish control. The motor cortex, the part of the brain that plans movement, goes offline. The body is not a thing to be directed. It is a thing to be inhabited, softly, like a well-worn garment. And in this state, the last vestiges of verbal thought dissolve. Language is a tool for engagement, for parsing a world of objects and actions. Here, there are no objects that need naming, no actions that need planning. The words chair, lamp, quiet, breath, they lose their symbolic power. They revert to being mere sounds that describe a state that is now fully inhabited. The state itself requires no description. It is known directly without the intermediary of language. This pre-linguistic awareness is the awareness of an infant or of an animal at rest. It is pure sensation without commentary. It is the feeling of being without the story of being someone. The room has achieved its ultimate purpose. It has become not a place to perceive, but a place to unperceive. It has facilitated the gentle dissolution of the perceiving self into the perceived environment. The sleeper is in the room, and the room is in the sleeper. The quiet is both outside and inside. The stillness is both of the air and of the mind. This is the deep well. This is the pool of nothing, from which all something is replenished. This is the blank page, the reset, the silent interval between the notes of life's demanding melody. Here, in this sustained, uneventful, profoundly boring quiet, the human organism does its most vital work. It restores itself to neutrality, to zero, so that it may once again, tomorrow, engage with the world of and so it continues. The quiet holds. While the stillness maintains. The room exists. What? The breath rises and falls. The heart beats its slow, steady rhythm. The faint hum endures. What? The pale light persists. Nothing happens. Nothing changes. Nothing is required. This is the gift of nothing. This is the story of stillness. This is the long, wordless, eventless, perfect, boring, beautiful, deep, deep, quiet, 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 sleep. And within that sleep, there was no story. There was no dream of action or adventure. If there was a dream, it was a dream of the room itself, a dream of the chair perceived from the inside, the feeling of being the foam cushion, holding a pleasant weight, a dream of being the dust mote in a state of endless, peaceful suspension, a dream of being the pale wall, experiencing time only as a faint, even pressure from the atmosphere, a pressure that asked for nothing and caused no strain. The quiet persisted. It persisted beyond the threshold of hearing, into the realm of feeling. It was a texture in which the sleeping form was wrapped, a texture of pure neutrality, not soft, not hard, but simply present. Like the concept of surface, the silence was not an absence now. It was a substance. It had a density. That density was the density of rest itself, a psychological and physical medium that slowed all processes, that cushioned all thought. Hours might have passed. The diffuse light around the curtains might have faded a degree, suggesting a dusk, or it might have brightened a fraction, suggesting a dawn. But within the room, the change was so slight, so gradual, as to be a geological event. The shift in luminance was measured in lux per hour, a crawl towards shadow, or towards gray light that was irrelevant to the deep, slow rhythms of sleep inside the room. The room acted as a buffer, a dampener against the cycles of the world. It was a capsule of perpetual twilight, the perfect ambience for uninterrupted rest. The furniture continued its silent vigil. The chair springs settled by a fraction of a millimeter more, having fully accepted their burden. The table's wood, responsive to the faintest change in humidity, perhaps contracted by a micron, a movement so small it would register only to an instrument, not to a sense. The book's pages, hygroscopic as all paper is, may have curled infinitesimally at the very corners, responding to the still air. These were not events. They were the room breathing at a pace 1,000 times slower than human breath, the exhalation and inhalation of materials adjusting to equilibrium. Consider the electrical outlet again. Within the walls, behind the faceplate, the copper wires ran through their conduits. They were dead wires. No current flowed. But in the wider network of the building, currents flowed elsewhere. In other rooms, clocks displayed digits. Refrigerators hummed on their cycles. Chargers fed tiny trickles of power to dormant devices. These flows created a complex, humming network of electromagnetic fields, faint ghosts of energy pulsing through the structure. The room was not entirely separate from this. The faint, constant drone that underpinned the silence was the auditory footprint of this distant, civilized activity. It was the sound of a world functioning smoothly enough to be ignored. It was the sound of infrastructure doing its job, which was to be invisible, reliable, and boring. This sonic bedrock was a reassurance. It meant the systems were working. Nothing required attention. Everything was on autopilot. That was the gift of the modern world. A boring, dependable background against which profound rest could occur. The sleeping breath had found its deepest pattern now. The breaths were long, slow draws, followed by longer pauses, and then soft, sighing releases. The pattern was one of profound metabolic rest. The body was in repair mode. Cells were dividing, tissues were rebuilding. Memories from the day were being sorted and filed in the hippocampus, not as vivid stories, but as faint impressions to be largely discarded. The brain was washing itself in cerebrospinal fluid, a nightly cleansing tide. All of this happened in the dark, silent factory of the body, governed by the ancient, automatic rhythms of the parasympathetic nervous system. The room was the external counterpart to this internal state. It was a parasympathetic environment. Everything in it said, "You are safe. You can rest. No demands will be made here." Let the mind wander back to the field in the painting. But in this drowsy state, the field changes. It is no longer a painting. It becomes a memory of a place that never existed, a primal memory of openness. The grass is not individual blades, but a soft, continuous fur. The sky is not a separate entity, but a dome of gentle light that merges with the air. There is no horizon line, only a gradual softening of green, into blue, into white. In this field, one does not walk. One is simply present, as a point of awareness. The concept of a body is vague. There is only the sensation of openness, of being uncontained, yet perfectly secure. This is the mental landscape that the room cultivates. It is anti-claustrophobic in its stillness. The walls do not press in. They define a safe space that then expands inward, into the mind, becoming as vast as any field. A sound, the first in what feels like an age, but is perhaps only 20 minutes. It is the sound of the building's central heating system engaging. A soft metallic clunk from deep within the walls or floor. It is not a sharp sound. It is a dull, thick sound, like a large stone settling in soft earth. It is followed by the faintest rush of water or air through pipes, a hollow, distant sigh, then a low, resonant hum, deeper than the electrical drone, a bass note of machinery. This is the sound of the building maintaining its temperature, fulfilling its promise of neutrality. It is not an interruption. It is a reinforcement. It is the sound of the room's promise being kept, the promise of constant, unremarkable comfort. The sound rises to a steady pitch and holds there, a new, deeper layer in the auditory blanket. Then, after a time, it cycles off. The hunk happens again, slightly softer. The rushing sigh fades. The deep hum vanishes. And the silence that returns is not the same silence. It is a silence that has been proven. It has been tested by sound and has reasserted itself, stronger and deeper for the contrast. The weight of the body is now absolute. It is as if the force of gravity has increased by a tiny, comfortable percentage, gently pinning the form to the chair, not as a restriction, but as an affirmation of its right to be exactly where it is. Moving, not at all. This gravitational embrace is the final permission slip for the mind to fully relinquish control. The motor cortex, the part of the brain that plans movement, goes offline. The body is not a thing to be directed. It is a thing to be inhabited, softly, like a well-worn garment. And in the state, the last vestiges of verbal thought dissolve. Language is a tool for engagement, for parsing a world of objects and actions. Here, there are no objects that need naming. no actions that need planning. The words chair, lamp, quiet, breath, they lose their symbolic power. They revert to being mere sounds that described a state that is now fully inhabited. The state itself requires no description. It is known directly, without the intermediary of language. This pre-linguistic awareness is the awareness of an infant, or of an animal at rest. It is pure sensation, without commentary. It is the feeling of being, without the story of being someone. The room has achieved its ultimate purpose. It has become not a place to perceive, but a place to unperceive. It has facilitated the gentle dissolution of the perceiving self into the perceived environment. The sleeper is in the room, and the room is in the sleeper. The quiet is both outside and inside. The stillness is both of the air and of the mind. This is the deep well. This is the pool of nothing from which all something is replenished. This is the blank page, the reset, the silent interval between the notes of life's demanding melody. Here, in this sustained, uneventful, profoundly boring quiet, the human organism does its most vital work. It restores itself to neutrality, to zero, so that it may once again, tomorrow, engage with the world of positive and negative, of action and so it continues. The quiet holds. The stillness maintains. The room exists. The breath rises and falls. The heart beats its slow, steady rhythm. The faint hum endures. The pale light persists. Nothing happens. Nothing changes. Nothing is required. This is the gift of nothing. This is the story of stillness. This is the long, wordless, eventless, perfect, boring, beautiful, deep, deep, quiet, quiet, quiet. The quiet was not a single note, but a chord composed of many layers of absence. There was the absence of loud sound, of course, the absence of shouts, of crashes, of alarms, but deeper still was the absence of medium sound, the absence of conversation, of music, of doors closing. Deeper yet was the absence of small sound, the absence of rustling fabric, of a ticking clock, of a fly buzzing at a window pane, and at the very foundation, there was the miraculous, sustained absence of the need to make a sound. The throat did not need to clear. The stomach did not gurgle. The joints did not creak. The body was in a state of such deep agreement with the stillness that it ceased its minor sonic rebellions and joined the silent consensus of the room. This was a quiet of the body, not just the ears. The air, which had been still, now seemed to become perceptibly thicker with peace. It was not a physical thickness, not a humidity or a density one could measure with an instrument. It was a perceptual thickness, a sense that the medium one breathed was saturated with tranquility, that each molecule of nitrogen carried a tiny inert parcel of calm, and each molecule of oxygen delivered it directly to the bloodstream. To breathe this air was to be slowly, steadily infused with the room's essence. It was a transfusion of stillness. The chair's green fabric, observed from the state of deepened rest, ceased to be a color and became a temperature. Green is, in the psychology of color, a cool hue, but this muted, mossy green was a neutral temperature. It was neither cool nor warm. It was the visual equivalent of the room's ambient air. It did not excite the eyes, it rested them. The twill pattern, the diagonal rib, was a gentle topography for the fingertips, but for the eyes, it was a texture that broke up light without creating a distracting pattern. It was a visual murmur, a barely there variation that prevented the flatness from becoming a void, while never approaching the status of a design. It was the perfect compromise between blankness and busyness. Beneath the fabric, the cushion's foam possessed a memory of its own. It was not a memory of events or people, but a memory of pressure. Over weeks and months of occasional use, it had learned the general shape of human occupation. It had softened in a particular configuration, a gentle, shallow basin that was not shaped for any one person, but for the generic idea of a seated form. This impersonal accommodation was comforting. It asked for no individuality. It did not require the sitter to be a specific person with a specific history. It accepted weight and shape in the most anonymous, non-judgmental way possible. To sink into it was to be accepted without condition, to have one's particularities gently erased and replaced with the universal experience of being supported. The table leg where it met the felt pad was a study in benign neglect. The felt, a grayish disc an inch in diameter, was compressed permanently. The fibers were matted, their springiness long gone. They had been crushed into a firm, flat wafer that served as a perfect buffer. Transition from wood to felt to carpet pile was a masterpiece of gradual give. Well, absolute hardness gave way to compressed softness, which gave way to springy softness. It was a triple-layer system for absorbing shock, for muting vibration, for ensuring that any tremor from the floor below would be deadened and absorbed before it could ever reach the tabletop, and thus the lamp, and thus the air of the room. The room was acoustically and vibrationally insulated from the ground of being. It floated on a cushion of carpet and felt and its own intent. Outside, the world continued its silent, distant turning. A satellite perhaps passed overhead in low Earth orbit, a speck of metal tracing a path through the blackness beyond the blue. It did not beep. Its signal, a stream of data, was a silent river of information flowing through the ether. Miles above the room, an airplane, at cruising altitude, left a faint dissipating contrail that would be visible only if the curtains were open, which they were not. Passengers within rayed, slept, watched screens, their collective journey a minor event in the atmosphere, producing a rumble that dissipated into nothingness long before it reached the window. Deep in the soil, earthworms moved through their labyrinths, a slow, blind processing of the earth. None of this mattered to the room. The room was a sovereign state of calm, with closed borders. It acknowledged the existence of the outside world only as a theoretical concept. Like a far-off galaxy, it had diplomatic relations with nothing. It was a hermit kingdom of peace. Within the body, the autonomic nervous system, that ancient pilot, had fully engaged the rest and digest protocols. The heart rate was at its nightly nadir. Blood pressure had dropped to a soft, low tide. Digestion, if there was anything to digest, proceeded at a glacial energy-conserving pace. The brain had largely deactivated the prefrontal cortex, the seat of executive function, of worry, of planning. The visual cortex was offline. The auditory cortex merely monitored the steady hum, a sentry with nothing to report. The dominant brain waves were now delta waves, the slow, rolling waves of deep, dreamless sleep, but the consciousness had not yet fully crossed over. It lingered in the borderlands, in a hypnagogic state where the perceptions of the room and the strange, liquid logic of early dreams began to subtly intertwine. The lamp, in this half-state, might cease to be a lamp. It might become a silent sentinel, a pale guardian standing watch. Its shape, the rounded base and the conical shade, was archetypal. It was the shape of a mushroom, or a certain type of summer hat, or a bell that would never ring. This transformation was not alarming. It was gentle. The mind, released from the duty of literal identification, played softly with forms. The book was no longer a book, but a blue block, a solid rectangle of compressed wisdom. Sleeping. The curtains were not curtains, but a taupe waterfall frozen in mid-plunge, a solidified cascade of fabric. These were not hallucinations. They were the mind's poetry of rest, a loosening of categorical bond. Things were allowed to be other things, or to simply be shapes, masses, presences without name. The temperature, that constant, achieved a new level of perfection. It was not that the body ceased to feel it. Rather, the body became one with it. The skin, the body's boundary, stopped reporting warm or cool. It reported same. The temperature of the air and the temperature of the skin were in such perfect equilibrium that the sensation of temperature vanished altogether. It was another boundary dissolved. One did not feel the air on the skin, because there was no difference between air and skin in terms of thermal quality. This was the epitome of comfort. The absence of the need to feel comfortable, because discomfort was an impossibility. It was a thermal utopia, a sound, so deep and low, it was almost a thought rather than a vibration. The subsonic murmur of a large truck many blocks away, a bass frequency traveling through the very foundations of the city. It did not register as sound to the ears, but as a pressure change in the room, a faint, fleeting compression of the air that made the stillness, for a millisecond, seemed denser, and then it was gone, and the stillness expanded back to fill the space, seeming even more profound for having been, however subtly, tested. The room was like a deep lake. A stone dropped in the center would send ripples to the shore, but the stone in this case was miles away, and the ripples that arrived were so broad and slow they were indistinguishable from the natural movement of the water. The breath was now automatic in the truest sense. The sleeper was not breathing. Breathing was happening. The body was breathing itself. The will had retired completely. The diaphragm was a piston driven by the ancient, rhythmic engine of the brainstem. In, out, pub. The pace was stately, funereal, serene. Each inhalation was a slight, cool acknowledgement of the external world. Each exhalation was a warm gift returned to it. It was a conversation without words, a perpetual, peaceful negotiation between the inner and the outer, conducted at the most fundamental biological level. To listen to this breath from the inside was to listen to the tide of life itself, slow, inevitable, and utterly reassuring. The concept of the field in the painting merged with the feeling of the room. The mind's eye no longer saw grass and sky, but felt a quality of space, an expansive, horizontal quiet. This quality seeped into the perception of the room's dimensions. The walls seemed to retreat, not in a dramatic way, but as if they were breathing out, expanding the volume of the room by an imperceptible amount. The ceiling felt higher. The space between the chair and the far wall felt longer. A vast, empty plain to be crossed, not by walking, but by drifting. The room became its own landscape, a minimalist landscape of plains and soft light. One was no longer in a small room, but in a vast interior prairie. The confines were an illusion. The true nature of the space was boundless, defined only by gentle shifts in tone and texture. Time, which had already lost its meaning, now lost its direction. It was not that time stopped, it was that it ceased to be linear. The present moment became a vast, unmoving plateau. The past, the day's events, earlier hours in the chair, was not a line receding behind, but simply material that had been dissolved into the general atmosphere of rest. The future, the waking, the rising, the day to come, did not exist as a point ahead. It was an irrelevant abstraction. There was only this, the sustained, endless now of quiet and weight and dim light. This eternal present was deeply forgiving. It held no regret, no anticipation, no anxiety. It was a moment that had learned how to hold itself forever. The dust mote, that faithful speck, had perhaps completed its journey. It may have finally succumbed to gravity and landed on the arm of the chair, coming to rest on the muted green twill, a single pale grey dot on a field of grey-green. Its journey, which took hours, was over. It had found its final resting place. It would lie there until a movement, perhaps days from now, dislodged it again. But for now, it was part of the chair's landscape, a tiny, inert moon on a fabric planet. Its motionlessness was absolute, a perfect echo of the room's greater motionlessness. On a molecular level, everything was in motion, of course. Atoms vibrated, electrons whirled. But this was the motion of being, not the motion of doing. It was the hum of existence itself, the baseline energy state of matter. The room had aligned itself with this baseline. Nothing within it was striving to be more, or to do more, than simply be what it was. The chair was perfectly chair-like. The air was perfectly air-like. The silence was perfectly silent. This alignment with essential nature was the source of the profound peace. There was no friction, no dissonance, no thing trying to be something else. Everything had arrived at its own point of perfect, boring completion. The weight of the body reached its final, deepest settlement. It was as if the bones themselves had become heavier, their density increasing harmoniously with the pull of gravity. They were not a burden. They were an anchor, tethering the consciousness to the safe, solid earth. This anchored feeling prevented the drifting mind from drifting into anxiety. It was a grounding wire for the soul. One could let the mind expand into the vast, quiet prairie of the room, because the body was a firm, weighted base, a root system sunk deep into the chair, the floor, the building, the bedrock. A subtle, internal sound, the faint, high-pitched tinnitus that exists in the absolute silence of perfect hearing. It was not a ringing, but a hiss, the sound of the auditory nerve's own activity, like the soft static of a television tuned to a dead channel, but infinitely quieter. This sound, normally masked by the noise of the world, was now audible, but instead of being intrusive, it became part of the meditation. It was the sound of the nervous system idling, a pure tone of readiness, with nothing to be ready for. Listening to it was like listening to the quiet hum of one's own aliveness, a tiny personal sonic signature in the void. The light, that sourceless, shadowless glow, now seemed to originate from within the objects themselves. The pale wall did not reflect light. It emitted a faint grey luminescence. The carpet was a brown-grey light source at floor level. The chair glowed with a soft, greenish light. This was not a visual trick. It was the perception of a mind so relaxed that it had ceased to separate object from illumination. Light and form were one. The room was not lit. It was luminous. This gentle, self-generated radiance was the visual equivalent of the inner warmth of deep rest. The room was shining with its own peace, and in this state, the last thread of narrative consciousness finally unraveled. The internal monologue, that voice that narrates experience, fell silent. It had run out of things to say. I am sleepy was no longer true, because the I had receded. This is quiet was no longer an observation one could make. because there was no this separate from the observer to remark upon. The subject-object relationship collapsed. There was only undifferentiated experience. The soundless hum, the weightless weight, the luminous gray, the quiet that was not a quality of the environment, but the substance of everything. This was the 0 point, the still center, the eye of the storm of being. Here, in this 0 point, repair happened on a level deeper than the cellular. It was a psychic reset, the accumulated static of 1,000 small choices, 100 minor irritations, the low-grade alarm of simply existing in a demanding world. All of it was gently scoured away, smoothed out like wrinkles in a sheet. The psyche returned to a state of smooth, blank potential. It was defragged. It was restored to factory settings, not of emptiness, but of pristine, peaceful order. The room was the facilitator, the temple in which this sacred mundane process took place. Its boredom was its holiness. Its uneventfulness was its ritual. The slow passage of time within it was its liturgy. To submit to its dull embrace was to participate in a ceremony of renewal older than consciousness itself. And so it held, and so it continued. A capsule of nothing in a world of something, a haven of stillness in a universe of spin, a deep, dry well of quiet where the waters of sleep rose up, cool and dark and restoring, to swallow the last remnants of the day, the self, the story, until there was only the pure, uninterrupted, beautifully boring, deeply necessary, silent, dark, and in that void there was everything, and in that everything there was rest, and the rest was deep, and the deep was endless, and the endless was now, and the now was all there was, and all there was quiet, quiet, don't lie, quiet, date, quiet, quiet. The quiet was not merely the absence of sound, but the presence of a profound neutrality, an acoustic zero against which the faintest internal processes could be heard, not as intrusions, but as the gentle mechanics of being. The zero was a perfect balance, a state achieved not by force, but by the gradual, mutual agreement of all elements within the room to cease their striving, to settle into their most fundamental, uneventful nature. The air agreed to be still. The objects agreed to be inert. The light agreed to be diffuse. The mind, witnessing this universal treaty, signed its own name in the ledger of peace and agreed to be still as well. This agreement manifested in the body as a sensation of liquefaction, not a melting, but a softening of all internal boundaries. Liaosing, the distinction between muscle and bone, blurred into a single, supported mass. The organs within the torso were not separate entities, heart, lungs, liver, but parts of a quiet, wet machine operating at its lowest, most efficient idle. The blood was not something that pulsed, but something that seeped, a slow tidal ooze through a network of compliant canals. The sense of having a head, with its busy factory of thoughts, dissolved. The head was simply the top of the column of weight, a rounded stone atop a statue, featureless and calm. The chair participated in this dissolution. It was no longer an external object upon which one sat. It was the foundation from which the body arose. The pressure points, the backs of the thighs, the curve of the spine, the shoulder blades, were not points of contact, but points of seamless transfer, where the body's weight was translated into the chair's support, without any sensation of interface. The fabric was not felt against the skin. It was simply the outermost layer of the skin's own universe, a textile epidermis. The chair's silent embrace was so complete it had become biological. an extension of the skeletal system into the realm of upholstery. Consider now the corner of the room where the two pale walls met. That vertical line was the quietest place in a quiet room. It was where stillness pooled, where silence concentrated. Light did not favor it. Shadow did not claim it. It was a neutral junction, a geometric fact, so pure it was almost abstract. To gaze at it, with eyes half-lidded and vision blurred, was to gaze at the idea of a corner, the Platonic ideal of where two planes might intersect at a right angle in a universe designed for rest. It held no dust, no cobweb, no flaw in the plaster. It was a clean, sharp line drawn in space, and its only purpose was to define the boundary of the sanctuary, to say, the quiet exists within here. It was a border that kept nothing out and nothing in, but simply was. The forgotten book on the table entered its deepest state of rest. Books, when read, are portals. They vibrate with potential energy, the energy of narrative, of ideas waiting to be unleashed into a mind. This book's potential was dormant. The portal was closed, sealed shut by the ribbon bookmark. The knowledge within, of sedimentary rock, of still waters, of migratory patterns, was asleep. It was not forgotten knowledge. It was resting knowledge, preserving its potency for a day when it might be needed, which was not this day. The book was a sleeping animal, its blue cloth cover rising and falling not with breath, but with the imperceptible expansion and contraction of its pages in response to the room's constant humidity. It dreamed its own dreams, perhaps, not of stories, but of the quiet forest from which its paper came, of the silent, mechanical press that stamped its letters, of the warehouse where it sat in a box on a pallet before coming here. Outside, the cycle that was neither day nor night continued. If it was night, the stars overhead performed their immense, silent rotation, a clockwork of staggering scale on which human concepts of time were a pathetic, fleeting scribble. If it was day, the sun, shrouded in a uniform layer of stratocumulus, diffused its energy evenly across the city, a blanket of photons without shadow or emphasis. In both cases, the room's relationship to the cosmos was the same, one of benign indifference. When the universe did not care about this room, and the room did not petition the universe for anything. They coexisted in a state of mutual disregard. That was the foundation of true peace. One was not hiding from the other. They were simply irrelevant to each other's processes. This was freedom. The hum, that foundational drone, began to reveal its internal structure to the ear that had truly stopped listening and started receiving. It was not a single tone. It was a chord composed of perhaps 3 or 4 very low, closely spaced frequencies. One was a flat electrical buzz, around 60 Hz, the frequency of alternating current itself. Another was a slightly deeper, more resonant tone, maybe 50 Hz, from the transformer. Beneath that, there was a soft, almost sub-auditory rumble, the vibration of the building's infrastructure. These tones did not harmonize in a musical way. They formed a cluster, a cloud of sound that occupied the very bottom of the auditory spectrum. This cloud was the sonic floor. It was the antemelody. It was the sound of the modern world at its most basic, idling state. To rest upon this sonic floor was to be supported by the very bedrock of civilization's background noise. It was utterly reliable. It would not change until the power itself went out, which it would not, because the systems were designed for this endless, boring reliability. Within the body, a subtle chemical peace was being negotiated. The stress hormone cortisol had ebbed to its nocturnal low. In its place, melatonin flowed freely, a dark, hormonal tide promoting sleep. Endorphins, the body's soft, internal morphine, gentle as the room's light, suffused the system, easing any microscopic aches, any residual tensions held in the jaws or the hips. Neurotransmitters like GABA dampened neural activity, turning down the volume on any potential mental excitement. The body was conducting its own internal symphony of sedation, each hormone and chemical a note in a slow, somnolent composition that mirrored the external symphony of stillness. The room was the concert hall for this biochemical performance. The painting of the field was no longer a window on the wall. It had become a pressure valve. When the stillness of the room felt, for a phantom second, too contained, the mind could vent into the vastness of the field. It was a psychological safety feature, but the need for that venting was passing. The room's stillness was now as expansive as the field's. The field had been absorbed. Its emptiness was now the room's emptiness. Its pale sky was the room's pale ceiling. The mind no longer needed to travel. It was already at the destination. Painting was just a reminder, a faded postcard from a country in which one now permanently resided. A sensation then, not an itch, not a pain, a pure sensation, unattached to need or discomfort. It was the sensation of the bloodstream in the fingertips. Faint, warm, fuzzy tingling, a tactile echo of the pulse, but slowed and spread out into a continuous, velvety presence. It was the feeling of life at its most minimal, cellular level. The profusion of tiny capillaries. Focusing on this sensation was like focusing on the sound of the hum. It was the internal baseline. It was the feeling of being alive, stripped of all story, all drama, reduced to the simple, miraculous fact of circulation. One liquid moving through soft tubes. Why, that was all. And it was enough. The air's stillness took on a new quality. It became a cushion for time. Time, having lost its forward direction, now simply existed in the room like another dust. It was not passing. It was suspended in the air, mixed with the nitrogen and oxygen. Each breath drew in not only air, but time, and each exhalation released time back, unused. The room was a reservoir of unused time, a bank of moments that were not being spent, but saved, accumulating in the corners with the dust. This was the opposite of wasting time. This was hoarding time, preserving it in its purest, most potential form. The sleep occurring here was not an expenditure of time. It was an investment in it, a compounding of rest that would yield interest in the form of clarity later in the world of events. The lamp's cord, where it lay in its gentle curve on the carpet, was a line drawn in the sand of the room's boredom. On one side of the cord, nothing. On the other side, also nothing. The cord was a dividing line between two identical kingdoms of uneventfulness. Its purpose was purely topological. It created a here and a there, in a space where here and there were otherwise identical. This was a playful, almost absurdist contribution to the room's geometry. It was a joke so dry it had evaporated, leaving only the faint beige trace of its punchline on the floor. The weight of the body achieved a state of perfect distribution. It was no longer a collection of heavy parts. Head, torso, limb. It was a uniform pressure, evenly disseminated across every square inch of contact with the chair. The chair, in turn, distributed this weight evenly through its springs and frame to its 4 feet. Each felt pad compressed identically. The carpet beneath each foot compressed to the same depth. The floorboards beneath bore an equal load. The weight traveled down through the building structure in 4 perfectly symmetrical columns of force, a silent, static testament to balance. This perfect distribution was a physical analog of mental balance. There were no hotspots of worry, no pressure points of anxiety. The load was even, the support was even, all was equilibrium. And then, a change so gradual, it was not a change at all, but a deepening of the existing state. The awareness of breathing faded. The breath had been a metronome, a gentle guide. Now, the guide was no longer needed. The breath became part of the background automation, like the beating of the heart or the filtering of the kidneys. The consciousness released its final anchor to the waking ritual of following the breath. It was cut loose, but not to drift chaotically. It was cut loose into a medium so uniform, so without current or wind, that to be loose was to be perfectly centered. It was adrift in a calm so complete that drifting and being anchored were the same thing. The visual field, behind closed lids, shifted from the gray velvet with phosphine swirls to a deeper, darker gray, the gray of a moonless sky at the bottom of a very deep well. The phosphines faded, their last swirls dissolving like cream in dark coffee. What remained was a darkness that was not black, but a color beyond name, the color of silence for the eyes. This darkness was not empty. It was a substance. It was the visual equivalent of the hum, a soft, full, resonant nothing. To gaze into it was to feel the eyes themselves relax into a state beyond focusing, beyond seeing. They became simply organs of reception, soaking in the dark. The room, as an external physical space, began its final retreat from immediate consciousness. Its details, the exact shade of gray, the pattern of the twill, the title on the book's spine, were gently erased from the mind's blackboard. What remained was the essence of the room, a composite feeling of safety, stillness, and neutral support. This essence was not a memory of the room. It was the room's gift, a psychic object that the mind could take with it into the depths of sleep. The gift was a simple, three-part formula. 1. You are safe. 2. Nothing is required. 3. Time does not matter. This formula was the key that unlocked the deepest chambers of unconscious rest. The boundary between self and environment, which had been softening, now underwent a phase change. It did not break, it evaporated. There was no longer a self in a quiet room. There was quiet. The consciousness was not a thing experiencing the quiet. It was a region of the quiet that had momentarily become self-aware, and was now gratefully dissolving back into the whole. The sense of E was a faint dissolving ripple on a vast, still pond. The pond absorbed the ripple without a sound, without a change in its surface tension. The water was just as smooth after as it was before. Smoother, perhaps. This was the beginning of true sleep, not the light, twitching sleep of dreams, but the deep, slow-wave sleep of restoration. The brain's electrical activity organized itself into the large, slow, synchronized pulses of delta waves. These waves were like the deep, resonant swells of an ocean far from any storm, moving with a rhythm measured in seconds, not milliseconds. They were waves of nothing. Waves of pure neural rest. The mind was no longer processing. It was being rinsed, washed in these slow electrical tides that scoured the day's synaptic clutter clean. The story of the room was over, because the observer who could hold a story was gone. What remained was the room itself, enduring in its perfect, boring integrity. The chair held the weight. The table held the book and lamp. The carpet held the floor. The walls held the ceiling. The curtains held the window. The painting held the field. The air held the stillness. The stillness held the silence. And the silence held everything. And in holding everything, it was nothing. And in that nothing, the body completed its most vital work. Cells divided to repair the minor abrasions of the day. Muscles replenished their glycogen stores. Loyalty. The brain flushed out metabolic waste through the newly opened channels of the lymphatic system, a nightly power wash of the mind. Memories were consolidated, not as vivid stories, but as faint impressions, filed away in cold storage. The immune system patrolled, quietly efficient. This was the unglamorous, essential maintenance of a human being. It happened best in darkness, in silence, in a state of profound boredom. The room was the ideal workshop for this maintenance. It provided no distractions, no stimulations, no interruptions. It was a clean, well-lighted place for the dark, silent work of the body. And so, the purpose was fulfilled. The quiet had done its job. It had coaxed the frantic, chattering mind down from its perch of vigilance, down through the layers of relaxation, through the meadows of drowsiness, into the deep, silent mine shaft of sleep. It had held a space where the self could safely come apart, its constituent elements allowed to rest separately before being reassembled at dawn, refreshed and realigned. The final sensation was not a sensation at all, but the cessation of the potential for sensation. The internal monitor shut down. The last flicker of awareness was of the hum, not as a sound, but as a vibration that was the fabric of existence itself. And then, even that was gone. Not gone away, but gone into. The awareness melted into the hum, and the hum was the universe idling, and that was all. The room was now alone, truly alone. The sleeper had crossed over. The chair held a body that was now purely a biological entity, a vessel on autopilot, sailing the dark sea of the sleep cycle. The room respected this. It intensified its quiet, as if leaning in closer to guard the process. The air grew, if possible, more still. The light, if it could, grew even more shadowless and diffuse. The objects in the room seemed to hold their positions with a tender solemnity. They were the silent nurses of the night shift, watching over a profound and necessary healing. And here, the telling must end. To speak further would be to intrude upon a sanctity. The story was never about the sleep itself, but about the graceful, tedious, beautiful journey to its threshold. That journey is complete. What remains is the quiet room. It is always there. A permanent address in the geography of calm. The walls are pale. The carpet is a medium tone. The chair is empty, or it is full. The book rests. The lamp is off. The curtains are still. The field in the painting is empty under a vast sky. It is a place of perfect, profound, and glorious boredom. A sanctuary where nothing happens, so that everything can be repaired. A silent story with no plot, whose happy ending is simply a deep, restoring, and dreamless sleep. Let this be enough. Let the quiet hold you. Let the stillness be your blanket. Let go, sleep, talk. And so the quiet remains, holding you gently as you rest. Let this peace stay with you through the night and into your waking hours. Whenever you are ready, you can slowly bring your awareness back to the feeling of your body resting, to the rhythm of your breath. But there is no need to rush. I'll rest here as long as you wish. Thank you for allowing this space to be part of your rest. Good night. Bye-bye.